Hey there, humans and robots of YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. Park Melton here. I'm new to this whole YouTube thing, so the next few videos I'm going to be trying out some different styles of videos, formats, just to kind of see what works. I appreciate you guys staying with me while I try to find my voice and get my feet underneath me, that kind of thing. So today we're going to be looking at some lineups that could have been. A lot of these are either in the very early days of the formation of these bands, or in the wake of a band member leaving the band or dying. Some of these resulted in gigs being played with the members I'm talking about. Some of them were just kind of things that were thrown around. Some of them or even just blown out of proportion by the media and were never actually going to be a thing at all. We're going to talk about all that. This isn't any sort of ranked list or anything like that. These are just certain examples of it, and there's going to be a lot of them I missed, so if you know about any that I missed, be sure and let me know in the comments for a follow-up video in the future. Well, let's go ahead and get right into it. So the first two on my list both are centered around Jimmy Page. In the wake of the end of the Yardbirds, Jimmy Page was trying to find a new band. He was forming it basically from the ground up. In the process, he was engaged in a jam session with Jeff Beck, Keith Moon, John Paul Jones, who would eventually be in Led Zeppelin, and Nicky Hopkins, really highly regarded session musician, did some work with the Rolling Stones and Al Stewart and some other people. That resulted in a song called Beck's Bolero, which is a pretty cool little jam. It's an instrumental piece. In the wake of that, there was a meeting between Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, John Entwistle, and Keith Moon, the latter two, both of The Who, where they talked about, maybe forming a band together. This is the meeting where I believe it was John Entwistle who said the phrase that would give Led Zeppelin its name: "This would go over like a lead balloon." The lineup never occurred because of Entwistle and Keith Moon's contractual obligations, because they were still in The Who at the time. The Who was very popular at the time. I believe this happened in 1968, if I remember correctly, somewhere around there. Also, they had an issue where none of the four people were talented as vocalists. I don't know if that really would have been such a big deal, because like I said, Beck's Bolero, which has several of the people that would have been Lead Balloon, as I call it, and there was no vocalist, and the jam is amazing, so I don't really know that not having a vocalist would have really held them back. Instrumental rock, maybe not quite as commercially popular as rock with vocalists, but I still think they probably could have made it work. I'm not sure. But Beck's Bolero, if you want to listen to that, that's probably about as close as you can get to what that group would have sounded like. But then again, it doesn't have John Entwistle, it has John Paul Jones instead. So maybe not as close as I might think. Who knows? But definitely still worth a listen. The next one also has to do with Jimmy Page. In the early days of the formation of Led Zeppelin, he was struggling to find a vocalist and was targeting a few different people. One of them being Steve Marriott of the Small Faces, and another one being Terry Reid of the Jaywalkers. Ultimately, he of course ended up with Robert Plant, who helped be a big driving force of how popular Led Zeppelin was and their distinctive sound. He's just a phenomenal vocalist. I read that when Jimmy Page was entertaining the idea of getting Steve Marriott in the band, that the manager for the Small Faces actually threatened Jimmy Page with bodily harm if he tried to get Steve Marriott to join his band, which I think is kind of funny. Ultimately, the Small Faces would disband, I think, 2 or 3 years after this. So, I don't know, maybe it was a missed opportunity for Steve Marriott, but then again, Led Zeppelin wouldn't be the same without Robert Plant, so. Next, this one is really interesting to me because I'm a big Jethro Tull fan. So, in the early days of Jethro Tull, they kind of burned through guitarists until, ultimately they would have Martin Barre, who would be the longtime guitarist. I understand that Ian Anderson is really hard to work with. He's sort of a vicious taskmaster, if you will. But in 1968, Tony Iommi of Black Sabbath fame actually played with Jethro Tull. They played 2 gigs, both in 1968, and then ultimately Iommi returned to Earth, which would eventually become Black Sabbath. And Tony Iommi says that his time with Jethro Tull was really good for him. It helped him form the discipline that would make Black Sabbath as good as they were. Because, like I said, Ian Anderson was something of a, kind of a control freak, you might say. So he was having everybody up early in the morning, practicing for a good portion of the day, Tony Iommi, like I said, they played 2 gigs. One of them was the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. There are recordings of this out there. I don't think it really does Tony Iommi much justice. I think the only song that I was able to find that definitely had Tony Iommi on it was Song for Jeffrey, which is a good song, but the guitar work in it isn't particularly phenomenal per se. I think, considering the direction that Tony Iommi would take with Black Sabbath, it was probably better for me personally, as a fan of Jethro Tull, that Tony Iommi didn't stay in the band. I'm a huge fan of Black Sabbath as well, and I don't think that the styles mesh particularly well. Tony Iommi's got a lot of blues influence, and early Jethro Tull did have a lot of blues influence, but they definitely kind of moved away from that as they became more of a progressive rock band. So, although it sounds like a match made in heaven, I really don't know how great it would have sounded ultimately. Speaking of Tony Iommi, next on the list, this one is honestly pretty funny to me. After Dio left Black Sabbath to do his solo thing, Black Sabbath actually interviewed quite a few vocalists, and some of them are pretty interesting, but the one that really stuck out to me as kind of comical was Michael Bolton. Michael Bolton started out being in a hard rock band, so it's maybe not too crazy to think that Michael Bolton might have been okay in Black Sabbath. It's kind of funny to think of now because most of Michael Bolton's hits are in the adult contemporary vein, which is definitely not the kind of music that Black Sabbath makes. So, we're probably lucky that Michael Bolton didn't become the lead singer of Black Sabbath, but at the same time, I'd be really curious to hear what kind of music they would have made together. This next one is Les Claypool in Metallica. This one's actually pretty famous. You probably have heard of it before, possibly. After Cliff Burton's tragic death, they were looking for a new bassist. They wanted to continue, and Kirk Hammett was personal friends with Les Claypool. I believe they went to high school together, and Kirk Hammett told Les Claypool, hey, come audition for Metallica. At the time, Les Claypool was relatively unknown and not into metal. His style is much more funky than metal-oriented. Primus kind of gets called a funk metal band a lot, but I think, Les Claypool never really appreciated that labeling. But anyway, went to the interview and did his thing, cracked a joke about jamming on some Isley Brothers. For one reason or another, he didn't get the gig, and it's probably for the best because Les Claypool is very unique in his bass style, and I don't know that it would have translated very well to thrash metal. However, Metallica did change their sound considerably over the next few albums in the wake of Cliff Burton's death. So, who's to say that Les Claypool might not have had an impact on the sound that Metallica ended up with? But who's to say? James Hetfield said that Claypool was too good for Metallica. Might have been lip service, might have been sincere, who's to say? Les Claypool himself said that he thinks that James Hetfield was just being nice. Could be true, don't know. Les Claypool has also said that he doesn't think that it would have been a very great fit for him. And, like I just said, I'm inclined to agree. Still would have been interesting. I'm glad that Les Claypool did his own thing. Primus is a great band. I like Oysterhead. I like the Lennon Claypool Delirium. I like pretty much everything that Les Claypool has done. So, I don't know. Definitely interesting to think about. Probably wouldn't have been that great of a mesh of styles, but who knows. This next one, this is one of those things that for me as a progressive rock fan, is almost like too good to be true, and actually would end up ultimately getting debunked in 2002. But this was the concept of Hendrix, Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, or sometimes referred to as HELP. The rumors were kind of blown out of proportion by the media. What happened was Mitch Mitchell was asked to join Emerson and Lake in a new band. They asked him to come in for a jam session to see how they meshed, see how it works. And Mitchell said that, Jimmy should come along and, see how they jive and everything. The jam session never took place. Mitch Mitchell, as far as I know, never played with Keith Emerson or Greg Lake. I could be wrong about that, but definitely not in the capacity of Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. Like I said, this one it sounds like it's too good to be true. Greg Lake is a pretty unique and interesting guitarist, but Jimi Hendrix is Jimi Hendrix. So I don't really know how they would have worked together. Also, who would have been vocalists, Greg Lake or Jimi Hendrix, because they're also both pretty talented vocalists. I don't know how the egos would have worked out either, because that was a big problem with Emerson, Lake, and Palmer a lot of the time, kind of conflicting egos, which makes sense because they're all virtuosos, so, they would probably be a little bit of a struggle for control a little bit. Don't really know how it would have worked out with Hendrix in the mix. I'm a big fan of Carl Palmer. I'm a big fan of Mitch Mitchell too, but I think Carl Palmer definitely edges him out in technicality. So I don't know if it would have been Helm instead of Help, or if it ultimately would have been Help. But ultimately the rumors were debunked by Greg Lake in 2002. So do with that what you will. Next we have Peter Frampton and Grand Funk Railroad. This is another one that's kind of weird to me. So the real weird thing about this one is that Grand Funk Railroad was looking for a keyboardist, and they were trying to recruit Peter Frampton after the dissolution of Humble Pie. It ended up not working out because Peter Frampton signed a solo record deal with A&M Records, so he had a contractual obligation in that regard. Ultimately, the job would go to Craig Frost. He was a great keyboardist and honestly ushered in kind of a new era for Grand Funk Railroad as far as commercial popularity is concerned. Not solely his responsibility, of course, but definitely a contributing factor. And he would also end up playing in Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band during their most successful period. So it's weird to me for a lot of reasons. Peter Frampton, at the time, he was kind of trying to change his image from that whole teen idol thing that he had in the 60s, and Humble Pie definitely kind of pushed him in that direction. The fact that they were looking for a keyboardist is what's really strange to me, though, because Peter Frampton, of course, is more known for his guitar playing skills. Not to say that he isn't an accomplished pianist, because he is, but it just seems weird that they would target him as a pianist and not a guitarist. But then again, his solo career hadn't launched yet, which is where his guitar playing really kind of came to the forefront. So, like I said, it's just kind of weird to me. I like Grand Funk Railroad and I like Peter Frampton. I think it would have been interesting to hear what they would have sounded like together. This is one of the few ones on this list that I think might have actually been for the better, but who knows? This next one's just kind of for laughs. In the early days of Alice in Chains, Jerry Cantrell, Sean Kinney, and Mike Starr, they all had, they were all jamming together and, forming a band, and they wanted Lane Staley. They wanted him real bad, but he was in another band, which was actually called Alice in Chains, where they ultimately got the name for their band. But they wanted him in the band, but he didn't want to quit the band that he was already in, so there was kind of like a back and forth. And so what the band decided to do to try to get him to join the band was they just kind of had a parade of auditions, and, they had a bunch of, very not talented vocalists come try out for the band, and Cantrell and Staley were living in the same place, so Staley was hearing all these auditions that just got worse and worse and worse, and I guess it kind of came to a head when Jerry had a male stripper come in and audition for the role of vocalist, and he was just truly awful. And I guess that was kind of the last straw for Lane. He was like, all right, I'll be in the band. So, that one's just kind of funny to me. Next one is really wild for me personally. So, Greg Lake was uncertain about the future of King Crimson and was kind of, had one foot out the door. So King Crimson was trying to find a session vocalist to fill in to finish the album they were working on at the time. And one of the people that they targeted was Elton John. Elton John is an amazing vocalist and an amazing pianist. I think it would have been interesting to hear him in King Crimson. Fripp ultimately decided against using Elton John after he listened to Elton's debut, Empty Sky, which, quite frankly, is fair, because Empty Sky is a decent album, but definitely not nearly as strong as what Elton John would make later, especially his follow-up self-titled album. I would be interested to know if Fripp might have changed his mind if he had waited and heard Elton John's debut, or self-titled instead of his debut, because like I said, it's a much more strong effort in my opinion. This one is really weird to me. I don't know that, Elton dabbled in progressive rock a few times, like 60 Years On and Tumbleweed Connection and, maybe even Madman Across the Water, depending on your definition of progressive rock. But him and King Crimson just sounds weird, it just kind of hits my ears weird just thinking about it. It's not to say that it would be bad, it would just be different. And then the last one I have is Rod Stewart in Deep Purple. This is another one that's just kind of laughable to me. I know, Rod Stewart in the Faces, he definitely has that rock edge, and his early solo career is really good in my opinion. I think he kind of moved a little bit too far into the pop grain for my taste later on, the late 70s and pretty much the rest of his career after that. If you want to butcher me in the comment section for saying that, that's fine, but I definitely think Rod Stewart was a lot better in his early years than he would end up being. But Rod Stewart in Deep Purple it just sounds bizarre, He auditioned for the role of singer during the band's formation, and he obviously didn't get the gig. I think it would have been an interesting fit. I don't know that it would have been great. Rod Stewart definitely has a distinctive voice, but, Deep Purple is, sort of the pioneers of heavy metal, up there with, Sabbath and Zeppelin and some of those other bands. I just don't really know if it would have worked long term, and I don't think Deep Purple thought it would have worked long term either, because he ultimately didn't get the job. But yeah, that's what I've got for this video. Like I said, if you know about any that I missed, let me know in the comments. I'm definitely going to end up doing a follow-up video, because there's a lot more of these out there that, some of them are funny, some of them are just, interesting to think about, some of them might have been amazing. So let me know if there's any that I missed. Also, if you made it this far into the video, really appreciate those likes and subscribes. I hate the kind of self-promotion that comes with making YouTube videos, but it's part of the thing. So if you feel like it, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.